All right, back into our regularly scheduled program with Talkback, and our good buddy Bob Seidenschwartz joining us from the Montana World Affairs Council. How you doing, Bob?
Guten Morgen, Peter.
Wow.
This is our international week, guys.
Wow. Well, if you're going to be international, how about if I just do Southern?
Yo, and we could do New York here because I got my buddy Arnie.
Yeah, we do. We have Arnie Sherman with us from the Montana World Trade Center. Welcome.
Not anymore.
Oh.
There's a new director at the Trade Center, and so I've passed the torch on, and now I'm involved in foreign direct investment here in Montana.
Wow. Welcome.
It's good to be here.
Tell me about that enterprise. What's that all about?
Well, there's a program called the EB5 Investment Program, which allows foreign investors and job creation programs to the United States to get accelerated access to U.S. citizenship. Still takes 4 or 5 years.
Right.
But in return, they're making investment in job creation programs, and we've generated money for projects here in Missoula, and we're raising money for other projects around Montana. So it's a chance for money that's gone abroad to come back and invest in good projects in our state.
Gotta love that.
So you guys choose who gets accelerated citizenship?
Correct.
Wow. What's on your list of things to check off?
I got $5 right here.
Well, we'll send you to Columbia for that. That's what $5 gets you. The investors have to invest $500,000 and create at least a minimum of 10 permanent jobs as a result.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. Excellent. Okay, but you're actually here to talk about the Asia-Montana Energy Summit, right?
Right. That's one of the things. It's coming up next week, and Bob's been intimately involved in it, and it's going to be a very exciting event here.
Bob, tell us what's going on with that, by the way.
Well, Peter, I gave you a little blurb there.
Would you like me to blurb it here?
You know, would you blurb it, please?
Right.
But I wanted Arnie in the studio today because he's going to be on a panel talking about energy in terms of how do we reconcile that with environmental issues. So that's going to be one of the panels over the 29th and 30th. He's also going to be part of the Montana World Affairs Council, Council in the Classroom, and he's going to be speaking to a number of students across the state as a part of that program, too. So he's pretty involved in the conference. So if you'd be kind enough to give a little update on what's coming up here.
I will now bloviate. Here we go. No, I'm sorry. The Asia-Montana Energy Summit will take place April 29th and 30th at the U of M. AIMS, that's the acronym, is a strategic initiative led by the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center to address the complex issues surrounding the future of energy and how it shapes our global environment, economy, and society. AIMS will bring together international thinkers, business leaders, and policy influencers as keynote speakers and panelists to discuss energy trends around the world, critical developments in energy technology and policy, and opportunities for cooperation between the U.S. and Asia. Like previous Mansfield Center conferences, the AIMS Expert Conference is free and open to the public. Conference attendees will include community members, students, professors and teachers, civic leaders, media representatives, business executives, policy officials, and energy stakeholders from the U.S. and Northeast Asia who are interested in public education, engaging in constructive dialogue, and encouraging collaboration around these vital issues. Registration is now open.
That was pretty good.
Thank you very much. I'm here all week.
Limited engagement only.
Yeah, exactly. And tickets are half price to listen to me talk. But anyway, so now tell me what you're going to do in this deal. Bob just kind of explained that.
Well, I think my role is to bring a non-scientific, I'm not an energy specialist, nor am I a specialist in the environment, but I am a business person that's traveled and worked in 100 countries during my career and have an office in China. We're looking at investment projects. We're doing a project right now or overseeing one that's taking place in the Bakken oil field. Wow. So we have a perspective on that from a little bit different approach and are trying to add some, I think, balance to a very serious topic, which is how do you balance, energy growth? How do you take the 13 energy systems that generate energy in the world and manage energy security at the same time manage climate change and all the other
Forgive
issues.
me for putting you on the spot.
Sure.
But what are the 13 energy creators here?
Well, you're talking about oil and gas.
I can
and
help
coal
him with
and,
some of those too.
And wind energy and solar energy and biomass and all of those are the systems that that produce energy that drive our economy across the globe.
Bovine flatulence.
Right, exactly. All of those things.
I just got a grant for that, Peter.
And then in the discussion about this balance, you have to take a look at how those impact climate change and air and pollution and water availability and water quality and land use and how it affects land use and all those issues. So it's not just simply the age-old or the historic issue like we had in Montana between ranchers and sheep herders and water and how do you manage that, or how do you balance between a state that attracts 11 million tourists a year and a state that has a third of America's coal and has part of the Bakken oil field, and how do you do that in a responsible way?
So, Peter, let me give you an example. There's roughly, we've talked about this before, you got 7 billion people on the planet. 2 billion people do not have access to electricity right now. Another 3 billion people have intermittent access to electricity, meaning that throughout the course of the day, there may be several hours where the electric power is not working. And this happens in major cities on a global basis. So if you're looking out over the next, say, 20, 30 years, that's going to be one of the great challenges is how do you bring these resources to these people? And, of course, once you do that, the standard of living dramatically increases, which means the amount of consumption dramatically increases. So this is going to be a significant part of what we're going to be talking about.
If I remember correctly, one of the very first times I had a chance to meet you and visit with you as part of this Montana World Affairs Council on the radio, that was one of the original theses that you brought up.
Right.
Was the fact that as countries develop and as they begin to improve their economies and begin to become more, if you will, middle class, they're going to need cars. They're going to need transportation. They're going to need roads. They're going to need infrastructure.
Right.
They're going to want to enjoy internet. They're all the different things that they see Westerners, because we live in a terribly small world now. They want to enjoy everything that everyone else is enjoying, and that is going to ramp up energy usage. So,
and when we come back from break, I want to ask Arnie, because he's traveled all over the world, has business interest in these areas, to actually give us some insight as to what he's seeing in some of these countries, to exactly your point, Peter.
Okay, we're going to come right back. By the way, all three lines are open. If you have a question or a comment, we'd love to hear from you. 721. Arnie's a very shy guy, so we'd have to twist his arm to answer your question.
And modest.
We're going to come right back in just a moment. We're back on Talkback, 721-1290. I'm not sure why I picked China Grove, but what the heck. There it is. The Doobie Brothers just jumping right out at me. All right. Now, Bob, you just brought up a topic, and you wanted Arnie to address it, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just mentioned before about really what the challenges are going to be going forward in terms of meeting literally just basic needs of billions of people. And I'd like Arnie to kind of comment on what he's seen on a global basis in terms of his travel and business interests, in terms of reconciling. How do you meet people's just kind of, housing and food and job opportunities and balance that with environmental issues? Because you've seen some pretty significant degradation in your travels in terms of the environment and that type of growth.
Sure. Certainly in Asia, particularly between China and India, with the staggering growth and the staggering economic development. I think India's GNP percentage increase this past year was larger than China. And, China's suffering from not only all of the effects of this economic growth in terms of pollution and air quality, but there's serious water problems. I mean, one of the interesting side effects of all of this growth that we're talking about in providing electricity and the basic needs in developing nations around the world, it drives a lot of water usage. In fact, Chairman of Continental Oil, who made $12 billion in the Bakken, said he's not in the oil business, he's in the water business, because every single well takes 4 million gallons of water. And you can see the effects of
and where
water.
Where does that water come from?
Well, the water for the Bakken comes mostly from a lake in Williston and from the Yellowstone River.
Okay.
And if there was a drought, for example, the primary use of that water is agriculture, and so agriculture would have priority, and you would even see greater diminution of activity in the Bakken as a result of a natural change in the environment.
So, Arnie, in the Bakken, there obviously water is a major concern. Are you seeing, though, the type of innovation and technology innovation in terms of taking water that's been used for the fracking and recycling, and is that not becoming a part of kind of the requirements that if you want to get permitting, that you're going to have to be able to demonstrate some capacity to do so?
I wish there was more. There are people experimenting with it, but given the cost, Bakken is more expensive to drill and frack wells than the old well technology. Most companies are going to do it the least expensive way possible. And right now, water is still easy to get there and still relatively economical, even though it's about 25% of the cost of drilling a well. About $9.5 million to drill a well in the Bakken, and 25 or 30% of that is water use. So they try to reuse the water and clean it up, but that's expensive technology, and water costs more that goes through that process. So as long as there isn't pressure or they're not being forced to use newer technologies, they won't.
Now, how does that factor into the price of oil? I mean, obviously, if is that all built in? Because like right now, it's $56.50 a barrel, New York trading. So is that all built in, kind of the cost of doing business?
Sure. They build in the cost of what a well is, what their cost for fracking is. It's built in. I think the tipping price in the Bakken is relatively low. They've gotten some of the economies down there. So tipping price, which means when they stop drilling, is probably in the low 40s. So,
wow, they got a long way to go there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you just said something I thought was interesting. You were talking about whether or not if they're not forced to use newer technologies, they won't.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of the consideration, right, for governments, whether or not we put artificial pressure on people to back off using technologies that are succeeding at this point in time in this market. And how do you make the decision on where to say I'm in support of this artificial pressure? It seems like, this is a very energy use and consumption and the side effects, negative and positive, are very different all throughout, not just the world, but even in America. Well, so like certain places seem that they can deal with a lot more types of use, others not so much. So why not have it a state-by-state sort of situation?
Well, most of the rules in the oil industry are state by state. And truthfully, globally, this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. You see it around the world. People aren't good at connecting current activities with future consequences. I mean, it's just a reality.
Sounds like teenagers.
Well, a good example is California, right?
Right.
Until you can't water your lawn anymore, people really don't care about how much water they've been using, and they'll pay the price of it. All of a sudden, when you have a crisis and the reservoirs are down to historic lows, and the state says, "Oh my God, we got to do something about this," and they stop people from, watering their lawns, people start saying, "Well, it's affecting me in the here and now I'm going to have to start paying attention to it."
And this is one of the things that this conference is attempting to do, is to bring different types of viewpoints together. I mean, California, good example. They stopped back in the 70s the type of construction that would have been able to, in effect, house some of this water for future purposes. Some of it was for environmental reasons. Some of it was for just objections to, agricultural purposes. So what you have now is lack of infrastructure that can actually capture this runoff and be used for future purposes, because some of this water is literally going into San Francisco Bay on a regular basis. So policy does dictate, to Arnie's point, behavior today with unintended consequences into the future.
One of the things Bob mentioned earlier about all this energy growth and trying to increase the standard of living across the world, within 20 years, half of the world will have a challenge at getting fresh water. Half of the world's population. And that even forms into the concept of, is water a human right? Chairman of Nestle says water isn't a human right. People should have to pay for it, no matter where they're from. So, I mean, that's an important issue.
Okay, we're going to come right back. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I agree with him.
Okay. Okay, we're going to come right back. 721-1290 is our number. Well, what isn't a human right? We'll be right back. Okay, thank you very much. My poor guests are scared to death here. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Arnie Sherman joining us this morning. It's the Montana World Affairs Council on the radios. We're talking about this energy conference that's coming up and some of the things that are going on in the world with energy and the environment. And Marilyn is on the line. Good morning, Marilyn.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Bob for what he just said, because that isn't being said enough. California and their policies have ruined themselves, and the rest of us are going to end up paying for it. And because they're listening to voices who have an agenda, who want to control, we need to let liberty rule and reign. We need to get back to God. He created this earth and the people and the water.
Well, what about private property, too?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And and climate change, I mean, excuse me, that's another agenda that's computer-driven, and it's not true. It's a hoax, and yet that agenda pushes us and takes our liberties and our tax dollars away, and we need to get back to free market. So thank you, Bob, for making that qualification.
Okay,
there.
we'll let Arnie address that. So go ahead, gentlemen. Let's talk about because in many cases we're talking about private property rights in this country. That there are companies that own water, and what happens to that water if all of a sudden it's declared a human right?
Well, in most cases, it's not considered a human right.
Right.
You pay for it. In developing nations, in undeveloped nations, there is some free water given. They said basically, I think the subsistence standard is 16 liters a day of water, and in some places they provide that, and then afterwards, it's a pay-as-you-go system. It's a difficult issue when you talk about the resources are controlled by folks who have dollars. I mean, if money's flowing into fracking, or if money's flowing into companies that are using water for industrial development, and you can't use it for agriculture, or it ends up being expensive just for the average person to get access to water, there's an imbalance that's driven by the economic realities.
There's several points wrapped in this discussion here in terms of, if I'm giving you water, it's coming from some place that I'm subsidizing you. And we see no better example right now in terms of the Middle East, which has heavily subsidized their economies in terms of oil, making it so cheap. In Kuwait, gas is several cents a gallon. The cost of living is so heavily subsidized. Now, that worked wonderfully when oil was at 80, 90, or $100. You could do that in these economies. Oil's at 50. Guess what? Now you've got deficits that they're running. Now they're starting to reevaluate, can they continue to do this? So
now they want to make nuclear power.
Well, the point is there's a cost to everything. Whether I'm giving it to John, I'm still getting resources from somebody else in order to be able to give it to John. And you've got to weigh these balances out in some capacity.
Or one of the reactions to what's happened in California is San Diego is building a $1.2 billion desalination plant. Right. And that water will have to be paid for. I mean, the
taxpayers are probably going to get rate increases in order to make that plant possible.
Sure.
Right.
Well, let's get back to the phone. And Harry has been waiting very patiently. Harry, good morning. You're on with Arnie and Bob. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Excuse me. I'm curious. This might be a long, diluted question, but what I see in the future, or at least the best promise for the energy, is instead of having large centralized power things like the coal plants or the oil plants, that they have smaller, diversified. Some places will be using solar, some places will be using tidal power, methane extracted from sewage plants. Even some places are like dairies and stuff using the cow waste to make methane. But it's each little place has their own power supply. But I know there's certain technology things that are right now to integrate it into the larger system. But also I think the bigger problem is the investment, because I think most people who like to invest, they like to invest in the large things because it's easier to control instead of all these little individual power plants. I know like in some places they're actually using the power from the gravity-fed fresh water, just extracting some power from that fresh water before they, but like I say, it's investments, and other than have public investment, how likely is a private investment going to be into that?
Harry, great question. So I'm going to let Arnie take a couple of these. I'm going to take a couple, and we're probably going to go over 10 o'clock trying to answer all of this.
Go ahead, yeah.
But really, there's a lot of excellent questions.
We got a minute to go for a break, so we'll tackle first of it, and then just off we'll go.
I think that the decentralization model works in certain places like in the U.S., but in places like India and China, the market is just too big. I mean, China, for example, has 26 nuclear power plants. They're building another 20 right now.
Wow.
They're putting a coal-fired power plant on a week in China. So in a place like that, they can't go to these smaller models because the cities are so large. You got to say like Shenzhen's got 35 million people with 15 million visitors every single day. You can't do that with a biodiversity project.
Yeah,
in places in small communities in the United States, it certainly could work, and they're moving in that direction.
Arnie, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you about that, because in the United States, it is becoming decentralized. So is there a point in time where China will start to take on some of those components?
Okay, we'll come right back and address that. 721-1290. We also have Dave, who's waiting to visit, and two lines open for you. We're talking about energy, the environment, the world economy. It's the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. We'll be right back. All right. 721-1290 is our number. Thanks for joining us. Gosh, the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio, Bob Seidenschwartz and Arnie Sherman, both joining us here in the studio. Let's get Dave on the line. Dave, good morning. You're on.
Yeah, good morning. I'd like to talk about aluminum. You know, it takes a lot of electricity to make aluminum, and the United States is shutting down its aluminum smelter plants slowly but surely.
The Columbia Falls is shut down, yeah.
Yeah, because of the cost. We can't compete, even though the world is using more aluminum all the time. Those smelters are moving to Saudi Arabia and to China.
Now, Dave, is the reason a lot have to do with regulation as far as environmental regulations and things like that, where other countries don't seem to be bothered too much about the kind of pollution that engenders, or what?
Well, it could be that, and it also could be the fact that they are subsidized by the government of those countries. So, I mean, you could pick several reasons, but the issue is long-term security, national security. If we get to the point where our military can't get a hold of enough aluminum or steel, it's happening in steel too. When does it become a national security issue?
Okay, let's ask Arnie. What do you think?
Well, I can talk specifically about Columbia Falls plant. The infrastructure was antiquated.
Right.
They could not compete with the new, more energy-efficient plants that are built in Korea and China and other places.
And to upgrade would have been
hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. I was in there. It looked like the inside of the alien spacecraft. It was that old. It was that run down.
Right.
There was pollution issues. Obviously, there was sediment. Build up. It was just they can't even sell the materials.
And now the EPA has to come in and clean it up, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a
John.
disaster.
I was going to make a chest burster joke, but we're past that. Let's go to the next call.
Right now, aluminum prices have dropped so much. He mentioned China, or Arnie mentioned China. China is subsidizing, though.
Right.
Their aluminum production to keep these guys going at the current moment, because the cost of production on the world market versus the price is not in equilibrium, but the Chinese government, because of some other issues, is saying, we will continue to subsidize. You keep producing right now.
Go ahead, John. John's got a Facebook comment.
Yeah. It's actually, do you want to finish the answer to the question? Or?
The only point I was going to add is part of the reason China can subsidize is because their economic model, the privatization in China is a misnomer. The government owns a stake in almost every business.
Right.
They generate a lot of revenue, and they reinvest that revenue in subsidies to a business.
Totalitarianism is a bang-up gig. All right, Claire says...
That's a T-shirt right there.
Claire says, now that Arnie is a Montanan and now that the CSKT compact has been approved, what does he think will... Sorry, I can't hear. Who does he think will be selling Montana water for their own, quote, economic development, end quote? Water that belongs to all Montanans. And then we have the Care Dam, which will just be gifted to the tribe, a foreign entity. Maybe Bob knows the answers and can fill Arnie in.
Fill me in, Bob.
I was talking about the Kerr Dam, by the way.
Right. The Kerr Dam. I don't know enough about to comment on the Kerr Dam and foreign entities. I do know that there are some states looking at our water right now. Right. And it's our neighbor to the south, and they're going, Montana has water. So that raises a very good question. Will we, at our cost, to us ourselves, sell water out of state if needed?
I had a conversation with the gentleman who's going to be running the Kerr Dam once the tribes take over. And his deal was primarily not the water itself, but the energy produced by that dam. Yeah. Okay, he says it's going to be put on the open market, like every other energy producer, looking for the highest price in order to benefit the tribe. Now, I don't know if that also includes the water that goes through the Kerr Dam, because that's from the Flathead River, and so and that is all included in that. I can't even figure it out, that morass, if you will, of the compact.
Right.
Because it's like 2,500 pages. Who knows?
Right. I have no idea what the details are in terms of the compact and how water is managed in terms of free market sale of it.
Right. Yeah, well, I can tell you water is not on the free market very much. As far as commodities go, it's restricted in many ways, much more than, for example, beef would be.
Well, I'm sure the Public Service Commission has something to say about that. Yeah.
Well, you've got to have infrastructure to move it, and that becomes a primary question.
Yeah, right. Can't just have a bucket brigade. Right. Let's get Catherine on the line. Of course, that would be a job producer right there. Catherine, good morning. You're on Talkback. Hi.
Good morning. China and India are going going full bore in development of their thorium reactors. China, especially with extensive help from the U.S., including taxpayer money. And Montana has copious amounts of thorium, approximately 95,000 tons in the Limhi area alone. So will your energy conference be addressing low energy nuclear reactors, thorium, molten salt reactors, and as a energy resource?
I think we need to have you on that panel, Catherine. So.
Catherine, you're invited to come speak. Actually, go to the Mansfield website. Look at the list of presenters, and you will see somebody that will be talking about the nuclear energy industry and the changes and advances that are taking place right now, to your point.
And by the way, there are many of those panels that will be open to public
They're
question
all
and
open
answer.
to the public, correct.
Right, yeah.
And there's no charge for that.
And there will, what I'm saying is there will be public question and answer sessions on some of those.
Absolutely. There will be a moderator during each of those panels. There'll be presenters, and then there'll be discussion. Recently, the Prime Minister of India was in Saskatchewan and just signed a deal for the ability to get uranium, because India is going to be building a number of nuclear facilities going forward.
Wow.
And this was a major kind of trade deal between Canada and the Indian government.
Hundreds of millions of dollars a deal. You know, regardless of the impact of the Japanese radiation issue at Fukushima, there are 437 nuclear reactors in the world. Most of them actually in the United States. We have almost 100 nuclear reactors here. But most of Asia, you know, Korea, India, China, are all looking at building many, many more. There's probably 80 or 90 under construction at the moment.
And I'd like to ask, when we come back from the break, why are we not doing that here in the United States? Because it's been identified that this is a clean way to produce electricity with no CO2 emissions. So when we come back, I'll ask my friend Arnie.
Go ahead, John.
Two things. First off, I've just posted a link to the conferences, so you can kind of see who's coming to the energy conference. Also, it's time to give away some free coffee and toast.
And Catherine, we're going to let you go. Thanks for the call.
We have all lines open. Give us a call, 721-1290 during this commercial break. First one call. You don't have to answer a question. Do anything difficult. We want to make it easy because it's the morning, and you're just waking up.
It's Monday. It's Rocket Coffee, and along there you get a great big chunk of toast with your favorite topping on it. It's right across from Tremper's there. So
and the Garden City Garden Supply.
And
So give us a call. Oh, looks like we're loaded.
721-1290 is our number. We're coming right back. All right, so I am now a punk rocker. Thank you very much. The world's only gray-haired punk rocker. All right, that's John King. I'm Peter Christian, Arnie Sherman, Bob Seidenschwartz. We're having way too much fun in here. Let's get Mike on the phone. Good morning, Mike. You're on.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. This planet is awash in water. The operative word is fresh water.
Right.
How do we get that to where it needs to be and where the best use is? Has anyone ever floated the idea, no pun intended, of harvesting icebergs?
Harvesting icebergs.
Get a decommissioned oil tanker with a gigantic insulated tarp, wrap it around an iceberg. One top of the tarp floats and the other one sinks to the bottom, and it's like a giant curtain, and drag that sucker to the coast of San Diego. Or just fill the ship up with a bunch of chipped ice, and by the time it gets to San Diego, it's I've seen that in popular mechanics. I think and what my point is, I think technology is going to find the solution.
Somebody with a blow dryer.
Rules and regulations and the.
I think you're right. I think technology is the hope for all this stuff. And a lot of the problems we have, I think, are infrastructure and cost related.
Sure.
Not necessarily availability.
Sure. I mean, the ocean water certainly can be desalinated. I mean,
the Saudis have been doing it for decades.
Israelis have done it. There's going to be the one in San Diego. It's certainly a movement.
And it's the primary platform for Hillary's campaign, desalination.
I am just waiting, Mike. I'm just waiting for the environmentalists to get a hold of your idea. And they say, what about the poor polar bears? Yeah, exactly.
Yes, the activists and the environmentalists and the will protest if a cold water sloshes over the edge of my curtain. Then I'm sued and I'm out of business. And it's a sad reality that the cost is inflated so much by all the rules and laws and lawsuits and regulation and just everyone wanting to get their finger in the pie.
Well, Mike, Can I add, too, at the conference, we've got a
Thanks,
gentleman
Mike.
coming to speak about the regulatory environment and what that adds in the way of additional cost. Either, it's not all negative. There's some pluses and minuses.
But there's also a fundamental unfairness in that, Bob. In that America. Well, I wanted to talk about this earlier when we were talking about regulations. The Kyoto Accords. Okay, they're what, 10 years old now.
Right.
Has America ever officially really signed on to those?
No.
Well,
and Copenhagen didn't happen either. Now they're going to Brazil.
Right.
So, look, you can have all the accords in the world. You still have to come up with the money. And that is going to be one of the primary issues that is at the heart of this. It's like every year, so many countries pledge money for disaster, so much for economic development. The sad reality is most of that money actually never gets to where it's being pledged.
Well, there's also the political reality that if you don't follow the accords, the sanctions don't necessarily, mitigate the viability of following the accords. So lots of countries sign on to accords.
right.
And
If you violate this code, we're going to send you a strongly worded letter.
And that they were kind of ridiculous for modern countries anyway. They definitely favored those that had spent a lot of. They kind of froze your development at the point where you were back when Kyoto was. Yeah. And China and India were ramping up, and they were full steam ahead. Lots of, well, as we know, too much in coal in the air, stuff like that. And America was on the way. They were reducing a little bit more. They were already established.
For instance, the EPA now, there was a court case, I think before a judicial court, one of the ninth or whatever it was, that was looking favorably on the government's right to say the EPA can set these standards for coal plants and shut them down. And I'm going, wow. That just blows my mind.
I want to take this just for a minute back into a little bit of a global
Go ahead.
perspective.
Go
I'm
ahead.
looking out your window here, this gorgeous, beautiful panoramic view of Missoula.
Right.
And the air is clean. You can see the snow in the mountains. You go to China, you go to a city like Xi'an, which is 3.5-hour air flight inland in an agricultural area, and the air is so polluted from the coal plants just firing into the air that you can't see a block and a half away. It looks like 2 o'clock in the morning at noon.
Let me ask you this, because when I see or hear about China, and I've seen, they have like giant television screens to let people in see what a sunset would feel like in the middle of the city. That's right. And it's ridiculous, right? How much of that do you think is just because of government malfeasance? I mean, this is a nation that ended up starving its own people.
Or corruption,
that tries to do everything centralization and struggles over and over again and has bad results.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with development over, individual health. I mean, it's clear that they don't follow their own rules.
Well, don't you think it's going to be hard for a government system to realize the benefit of individual health if it cares little for individuals and thinks only in the macro?
Well, I think one of the ways to mitigate that is as the growing middle class and the growing group of people in China that have exposure to the rest of the world don't want their children raised that way.
Right.
Well, and look, let's look at the.
No,
Peter,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you rock on.
Look, it's very easy, and I get caught up in this too. Government, anti-bad, good, this. You have to go back and look at the history of China here. China was trying to bring itself from the 19th century into the 20th century.
Right.
This was done in such an amazing fashion on so many levels to just bring up the standard of living. Yes, John's right. It wasn't that many years ago that 30 million Chinese were starved under, a corrupt regime. But you have to also put in perspective where they were, how far they've come. And to Arnie's point, now a good part of the populace is no longer willing to put up with what they are living in terms of the type of environment, pollution, and those issues.
So we're going to take a break. Craig is on the line, and we have 2 lines open. And believe it or not, only about 8 minutes left in the program. So if you want to get into the conversation, this is the time to do it. Don't procrastinate. We'll be right back. All right, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. And let's get right to the phones because we're rapidly running out of time. Craig, you're on with Arnie and Bob. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, guys. I just have a comment to make, if I may. You didn't do bad this morning, but you did start getting on the bashing of these environmentalists, and I'm certainly not one myself. But I know damn well if they didn't start in the 70s and stuff, getting on everybody for their pollution, and you mentioned China's air and you mentioned Missoula's air, we'd be sucking air in this country just like China's. Because if it wasn't for those people, we would have.
Now, Craig, allow me to jump in here for a second.
Yes.
Are you saying to me that if it wasn't for the environmental movement, in some ways the radical environmental movement that did, so many things back in the 70s, as you mentioned, that we would still have TP burners in Missoula, that we would still be clear-cutting all the forests and then burning everything in sight? I mean, do you really think that?
I am suggesting that, and I'm just saying that they had to be radical, because in the day, industry was it, and big money handled everything, and things were getting so out of control. Yeah, they had to become radical.
Okay, well, let's
Craig,
ask our guest.
Would it surprise you if I said that I agree with a number of your sentiments? In fact, I've said this on the show, that acid rain, if it wasn't for regulatory environments back in the 60s and 70s, would industry have done this voluntarily? Arnie and I are from the East Coast. We can talk about river systems back there that were horribly polluted to the point where there was no ability to use that water both for industry and for agricultural purposes. So I don't think we're saying here, everything about environmental is bad, bad, bad. Oh. There's a place, but what we're going to try to do is come to where is that cost? And where, as Peter and John have mentioned several times, where are those rights? Where are those privileges? Where's our responsibility?
And where's the balance?
And where's the balance? And that's one of the reasons that I would encourage Craig and everybody else listening, please come to the conference.
Okay, let's get Dave on. Dave, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Yes, about air pollution.
Yeah.
I worked at Bonner Mill in the boiler room, supplying steam to the Bonner Mill for 20 years, better. And when I first came out there in 1972, they didn't have scrubbers. They didn't have any air pollution system. They had just turned off their teepee burner because they were required to. And they built a brand new boiler, spent several $1 million just so because of the environmental laws. Up until then, it was all just piling burning.
So you're saying that would have continued on had it not been for government intervention?
Yeah, it certainly would have. It was easy,
okay.
Just pile it and burn it. But the interesting thing about the boiler was they griped about building it, but when they got it built, they had extra steam to dry their lumber, and they had a lot of benefits from it.
Cool.
But when they did put the scrubbers in, they were expensive to maintain. It cost a lot of money to keep the water. We used water sprayers to spray the smoke, and it was expensive to keep that going. But there were benefits to the air pollution.
All right, Dave. Thanks for the call. Thanks for your perspective. We appreciate it. All right, good to know. He worked there, so.
Well, sure. I mean, in a democracy, you have to have balance, right? You have to have the ability for citizens to speak out on their own behalf. Industry and business is not going to always do what's in the best interest of anything other than their stockholders and their investors.
Right.
And it's just a reality. So there is a good balance.
Well, Arnie, we were talking about this off air. Sometimes things can get too extreme, too, when the answer is right in front of you, but you refuse to do it for reasons that then become burdensome. And an example is the nuclear energy industry. Other countries are building these facilities. It's very clear that you can produce electricity which does not omit CO2 and pollutants. Now, the other issues, though, have to be addressed. So what is it about this country right now that we cannot build new facilities going forward?
Is it storage?
Well, look, a lot of the storage can be addressed. Other countries are building, they're addressing the storage issue. The plants are not the same plants that they built 40 years ago. And the technology is not the same as it was 40 years ago.
But it's the residual effect of 3 Mile Island, right, and the fear of the public of nuclear contamination.
Yeah, actually, for storage and stuff like that, we're one of the best countries in the world for that. The thing that really makes nuclear interesting is, as was mentioned earlier, Catherine brought up thorium reactors. I mean, these are much smaller. They don't take as much in my backyard political space. They don't have the risks of, isn't going to cause nuclear damage to the local area. If it's not going to have the potential to overload or overheat or do something like we saw in Japan recently.
Like a meltdown.
Well, and it's the lesser of the evils in terms of air pollution, air quality, and CO2 emissions. And
now, what about because we talked about traditional nuclear plants being prohibitive cost-wise, is a thorium reactor significantly less expensive to make?
Right now, they're still developing the theory behind it, and they actually have the theory, I believe, but getting the infrastructure and designing a system that works. The thing that's good for other nuclear plants is we have so many examples and a long history of dealing with them, and we know how to fix them and what's going wrong and what's going right. With thorium, I think they're just now putting the first models in the ground.
But there has certainly been advances in the 40 years on traditional nuclear reactors in France and other places around the world. They're very efficient, and they minimize the risk associated with them.
And what did the Germans do here a couple of years ago? They shut down their nuclear reactors, and then what did they find? Price of electricity went up tremendously. And where did they have to go to get the makeup differential between what they shut down? They went to countries that have nuclear energy, and they're using more coal.
We're out of time, and the Asia-Montana Energy Summit is April 29th and 30th at the U of M. Arnie and Bob, thank you. Guys, have a great day.
We need a whole...
You know what? We still have a minute left.
No!
Okay.
I was going to say, off of Bob's comment with Germany, if you're not using your own nuclear energy, you're basically paying for Iran to make a nuclear weapon.
Sure.
Because you got to pay for it somewhere. You're sending your money to some other country that's going to be much worse off and spending it on things that are going to hurt humanity much more.
There's no question about that. Yeah. And I think it is a strong growth area. And I think, as Bob mentioned earlier, environmentalists have come around to taking a look at the new generation nuclear reactors, and they look to be very promising.
Right. If we want to get this bridge to the future of clean energy, people have to understand you're going to have to use more energy now and for the next couple of decades to get to that bridge.
All right. So would you want to have a nuclear facility near your community?
I'd build one in Bonner.
All right. Okay. Now we're out of time.
Where do you live?
Thanks for the call.